It's no doubt that in 2025, PC gaming has become an expensive hobby. Contrasted to 2017, arguably the golden era of computer hardware, Nvidia's GTX 10 series, AMD's huge CPU comeback with Ryzen, and Intel barely keeping up with their 7th and 8th gen CPUs, but still marginally ahead in gaming performance, all with affordable prices and performance that's stuck at every price range. But 2025 has been a pretty bleak year for PC hardware, despite being at the bleeding edge of what's possible. Take the recent GPU launches. RTX 50 series may brought peak performance with the RTX 5090 and cutting edge features like DLSS 4 and multi-frame gen, but those same features highlight a more seismic shift where upscaling and frame gen have become the expectation for a performance baseline and not a bonus that meaningfully improved native gameplay or fidelity. Regardless, it was an underwhelming generational improvement in raw performance, especially compared to the last generation, a trend that continued with every model in their lineup while the costs have consistently risen. And sure, AMD had a little bit of success with the Radeon RX 9000 series, but they were sure to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. For the 9070 XT, many had to pay above MSRP with demand high and supply heavily constrained. The 9060 XT fared a little better, at least for the 8GB variant, but the 16GB model faced the same issues with markups and little were found at MSRP. But the good news is that Intel's Arc B580 and B570 are actually holding up in the value department, and recent launches from AMD and Nvidia have seen their supply stabilize, leaving some actually at MSRP. There's more to this story though, and that's what we're going to break down in this video. GPU component pricing is one thing, but the big picture is stagnant wages, rising cost of living, and poorly optimized games are changing how affordable PC gaming really feels. We'll break it down tier by tier, with budget, mid-range, and high-end, and then we'll pull back to look at the real economic pressures and whether modern games actually justify hardware demands. Let's dive in. Back in 2017, a mid-tier build from Tom's Hardware clocked in around $1,250, which works out to be around $1,650 in today's money when adjusted for inflation. At its core was Intel's i5-7600K with 4 cores, no hyper-threading, but Intel still consistently held the gaming crown. To unlock the 7600K, you paired it with a Z270 motherboard, a solid single tower air cooler, and 16GB of DDR4 at 3200MHz. The GPU of choice was Nvidia's GTX 1070, an 8GB Pascal card that could comfortably max out 1080p, stretch into 1440p, and even dabble in 4K with some compromises. Storage was split between a 275GB SATA SSD for the essentials and a 1TB hard drive for bulk storage, and was rounded out with a reliable Seasonic Gold power supply and a practical Cooler Master case. This setup wasn't cheap, but it gave you excellent 1080p and 1440p gaming, and at the time, it felt like you were set for years. Fast forward to 2025, and mid-range looks radically different. Today's build sits at around $1,514, which is actually cheaper in real terms versus the 2017 version, about 8% less after inflation. Yet the hardware leap is staggering. At the heart sits AMD's Ryzen 7 7800X3D. For $359, you get 8 Zen 4 cores, 16 threads, and AMD's 3D cache tech. In many titles, it outpaces CPUs that cost twice as much. The motherboard is a B850 board with Wi-Fi 6E, and memory has doubled. 32GB of DDR5 6000, CL30. The GPU is where most of the money goes, as always. Here we're slotted in AMD's Radeon RX 9070 XT. We're talking 4K with ray tracing, which historically AMD cards used to stumble with, is now fully viable. Storage is 1TB NVMe SSD for $59, with about the same capacity as the SSD and HDD combo from 2017, while being considerably faster. Even the power supply is beefier, 750 watts, fully modular, gold rated for $75. That's more wattage, higher efficiency, and a lower price in real dollars. On paper, it's almost too good to be true, and costs less in inflation adjusted terms. But here's where we hit a paradox. If the hardware is indeed stronger and more affordable, why doesn't PC gaming feel cheaper? Well, the answer lies in what we've been asking these PCs to do. Games themselves have ballooned in requirements. In 2017, a mid-range PC could easily handle the biggest titles of the day: PUBG, GTA 5, Witcher 3, often at max settings. In 2025, even with the 9070 XT, you're often just scraping by at 60fps at 4K without upscaling. Borderlands 4 launched this month, built on Unreal Engine 5, and barely manages mid-60s at 4K on this card. And the game itself steers you towards upscaling and frame generation. That's become less of an optional boost and more of a crutch for shaky optimization. Even the 2300 RTX 5090 can dip into the 40s of 4K without frame gen, which really shows how steep the baseline really is. It isn't just Nvidia either. FSR 4 is pushed heavily heavily on the AMD side. Whether it's DLSS, FSR, or XeSS, the pattern is essentially the same. These tools are increasingly becoming a stand-in for deeper optimization. Civilization 7, a strategy title of all things, now recommends a 4070 class GPU just for smooth 4K. Doom the Dark Ages demands a 3080 or an RX 6800 just to hit 60 FPS at 1440p without upscaling. The uncomfortable truth is, while our mid-range builds have surged forward, the games have sprinted even faster, or perhaps stumbled forward, depending on how you look at it. Many aren't meaningfully more beautiful than their predecessors, but they're exponentially more demanding. The developers lean on brute force hardware rather than deep optimization, and when you fold in stagnant real wages, higher rent and grocery bills, and record household debt, that $1,500 mid-range machine doesn't feel as accessible as the $1,250 one did back in 2017. So yes, the 2025 mid-range PC is objectively more powerful, but whether it feels more affordable or even more rewarding is another story entirely. And if this is what mid-range looks like today, what happens when we step up to the true high-end? That's where the real cracks in affordability become impossible to ignore. Back in late 2017, a true high-end build meant reaching for Intel's brand new i7-8700K. At $370, it blew past the older 7700K. Intel still consistently held the single-threaded gaming crown. Paired with a sturdy MSI Z370 Gaming Pro Carbon with 32GB of DDR4 3200 and a GTX 1080 Ti, you had the ultimate enthusiast rig. The 1080 Ti at $750 was the ultimate Halo card of its time, with 11GB of VRAM, 4K gaming capability, and unrivaled performance. Storage was still a split between a 480GB M.2 SSD and a 2TB hard drive, all powered by an EVGA 850W gold PSU, and all housed in a sprawling Fantex NVO Premio case, with the total cost of around $2,345 in 2017, roughly $3,070 today. Fast forward to 2025, and the definition of high-end has completely shifted. Today's build comes in at around $3,547, which is over 15% more expensive in real terms. At its core is AMD's Ryzen 7 9800X3D. Like the 7800X3D before, this chip uses stacked 3D V-cache. For pure gaming, it's the uncontested choice, and while AMD's 9950X3D also exists, it simply can't compete with pure gaming value. Memory is faster, tighter, and cheaper. Storage leaps forward too. A 2TB PCIe 5.0 NVMe SSD for $200 versus a 480GB SATA SSD for the same money back then. But all that fades into the background next to the GPU. Nvidia's RTX 5090 at $2,299. Just like housing or healthcare in the broader economy, one essential piece has spiraled upward far faster than wages. And that matters, because unlike cases or power supplies, the GPU isn't optional. If you want to run today's blockbuster games of 4K with ray tracing, you're paying the premium. And yet, does the payoff even feel worth it? Well, in a way. Titles like the aforementioned Borderlands 4 and Civ 7 are infamous for high-end requirements that deliver only modest visual improvements. Yet again, we're brute forcing through poor optimization with multi-frame gen and upscalers rather than marveling at clear generational leaps. So the high end is kind of like a paradox. On the one hand, it's definitely the most powerful gaming experience ever, backed by CPUs and memory that are cheaper and more efficient than ever before. But on the other hand, the GPU arms race has priced the very top tier beyond inflation. And if this is the cost of chasing the best, what does it mean for gamers who just want to build something more affordable? That's where the budget tier tells a very different story. In 2017, budget meant clever compromises. A Ryzen 3 1200 gave you 4 true cores, improving consistency over Intel's stagnant 7th gen dual-core i3. For just over $100, it was an absolute value play, especially when pairing it with a cheap B350 board like this one from ASRock. Memory was tight though, because DRAM was expensive, so 8GB of DDR4 2400 was about $67. For graphics, the EVGA GTX 1050 Ti 4GB at $150 was the absolute hero. Storage was still of course split between the 250GB SATA SSD for your OS and a couple of favorites, and a 1TB hard drive for everything else. All of it powered by a 520W Seasonic bronze power supply and a no-frills Cooler Master case that kept it all together. All up, that build was roughly $625 back then, about $820 in 2025 dollars. And it definitely did the job. You could manage 1080p medium to high settings in esports and lighter AAA games, and versus a PS4 and Xbox One, it was a little more expensive upfront, but with a lot more flexibility. Fast Fast forward to today, for roughly $755, you can get a Ryzen 5 9600X with 6 cores and 12 threads and way higher RPC than that old Ryzen 3. Because the modern X chips, for whatever reason, don't ship with coolers, you would bolt on a dirt cheap 120mm tower cooler for under 20 bucks and call it a day. The motherboard is a $100 B650 Micro ATX with AM5, DDR5 and PCIe 4.0/5.0 ready to go. With the memory, we're not sweating 8 gigs anymore. We've got 16GB of fast DDR5 6400 megatransfers CL32, all for about 50 bucks. That alone tells you how much the market has shifted. The biggest swing though is in the GPU. Instead of a 4GB 1050 Ti, the budget slot now takes Intel's Arc P580 12GB at around 250 bucks. You get great value in newer DX12 and Vulkan games, with the caveat that a few older or niche titles still need that TLC. And the storage situation is night and day. A single 1TB PCIe 4.0 NVMe for roughly 54 bucks replaces the old SSD plus HDD juggle. The case is still under 50 bucks, but it actually breathes now. And for 40 bucks, a 550 watt power supply is enough because the whole system sips roughly about the same power as the 2017 build did, despite being vastly faster. And that's about 755 bucks in real terms. Roughly 8% less than the 2017 budget build once you adjust for inflation. And the experience, for the most part, is in another league. We're talking 1080p Ultra in most modern games, with room to push many titles beyond 1440p high settings. Even entry-level ray tracing is on the table. So on paper, budget in 2025 looks like an absolute slam dunk. And yet again, it's a paradox with budget builds, much like high-end. The silicon is objectively a better deal, especially in CPUs, RAM and storage. But the GPU story is mixed. Yes, you get vastly more capability than the 1050 Ti could ever dream of, but the entry point moved from 150 bucks to 250 bucks. The only reason the full build still nets out cheaper in real terms is because everything else got much more efficient and more affordable. And of course there's also the software side of things. A minimum spec PC today often looks like last generation's mid-range, and recommended specs lean on modern GPUs and fast SSDs as a given. When a budget card in 2025 can flirt with 1440p, but new releases still stumble from optimization issues, you find yourself spending more to maintain the same level of comfort. And since even budget tier requirements now assume upscaling by default, the true baseline of performance feels further out of reach. If you're coming from 2017's budget tier, 2025's budget is transformational. But if you're looking at your monthly bills and not just a spec sheet, 755 bucks can feel as distant as high-end money did 8 years ago. Just because it's cheaper doesn't mean it's automatically more affordable when wages are flat and rents up and games keep shifting the goalposts. The good news is that entry-level hardware is no longer really a bottleneck for at least baseline 1080p experiences. The bad news is though, the real barrier for a lot of people is outside that case. And that tension between what parts can do and what our paychecks can cover is exactly why mid-range felt different and the high-end feels gated. In 2025, the price of PC gaming splits in two. Budget and mid-range machines are objectively better deals than 2017. But at the very top, the logic breaks completely. High-end is more expensive than inflation because GPUs have sprinted ahead in price and pulled the whole tier with them. People assume affordability is defined by the total build cost, but it's really shaped by paychecks and priorities. Real wages are barely moved, living costs have climbed hard, and the household debt has set records. And the software side of things pushes from the other direction. Minimums and recommendations leapt a complete generation, while optimization often lagged behind. Frame gen and upscaling now smooth the edges, but they don't raise the core problem. They're becoming a crutch, standing in for optimization, while games that should have just run better from the start. So is PC gaming really more expensive in 2025? Well, if you're shopping in the budget or mid-range, the silicon definitely says no, but the lived experience can still say yes. If you're chasing the very best, it's simply yes. But the path forward is this. You need to pick the tier that matches what you play, accept the economy now weighs as much as a spec sheet does, and measure upgrades against experience and if it's worthwhile or not, and not just the benchmarks. That's the real cost of PC gaming in 2025. Anyways guys, that's all for today. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.